All right, so thank you all for coming. So we are going to talk about publishing your software, and in particular in the Journal of Open Source Software. So that started very well.
What's going on?
Okay, yeah.
Maybe just click.
All right, so just quickly, so it's basically a role-playing game. So I will be the author. Arfon, as the editor-in-chief of JOSS, will play the editor-in-chief of JOSS. And Edwin, who is there, will be, will be the reviewer. And so we are going to go through a very few slides at the beginning, and then we'll actually start the walkthrough. And hopefully we'll have enough time to go through all of it. All right, so I guess I don't really have to convince you why it's important to publish your software. So evidencing heresy work is not always easy, because traditional outputs like science software leave very little space for software in the core of the paper. And they overlook a big chunk of actually the research process, the research work. And publishing your software can help fix this problem. So as you can see in the cloud of Word, there are a lot of things that will be enabled by publishing a software, open research, transparency, credibility. You will get credits for your software as well, because you will have actually a paper that people can cite. But actually, where can you actually do this? So there are two types of journals that are actually accepting software publications. So that the generalist ones, JOSS, that we are going to go to see today. So it's an academic journal with a formal peer review, completely public. Everything is on GitHub. We have JOSS, Journal of Open Research Software, which is also a software journal about open research software for used in research. And then we have Software Impacts, multidisciplinary open access peer-reviewed journal, which publish short articles about software. And then we have more domain-specific journals. So if you are working with astronomical codes, you can submit stuff to astronomy and computing, social science. You have Journal of Artificial Societies and Social Simulations. So there is a full list on software.ac.uk that you can look at. And for all domains, you have actually journals that are accepting software submission. And now I think I will leave.
All right. And you can hear me as well, everyone? Yes, very good. OK, yeah, so what can you publish in JOSS? Well, really, what we would define as research software. So this is from our public docs that are on Read the Docs. We publish articles about research software, which this is our working definition, by the way. If you hate it, you could propose a pull request to change it. But this is our current scope. So it solves complex modeling problems, maybe software that interacts with instruments and the functioning of them, maybe something that helps run a research experiment, extracts knowledge from very large data sets, or maybe it's a library that you've built that solves a particular research in a particular research space. One thing that we note here in our research scope is that we don't publish models. Models are obviously incredibly useful, but it's not something that we consider software. Although if you subscribe to the sort of software 2.0 idea of Andrej Karpathy, you might disagree, because I think he thinks that the future of software is just large neural networks. So I guess the JOSS becomes deprecated when we all transition to that mode of working. So requirements. So if you want to submit to JOSS, hopefully it's not a surprise that your software has to be open source. Maybe you say, but what do you mean by that? And what we mean by that is the definition administered and maintained by the Open Source Initiative. JOSS is an open source initiative affiliate. The software has to be hosted in a publicly accessible repository where people can freely contribute. So this trips up some authors here. Maybe you have, I don't know, an institutional GitLab repo that not anyone can subscribe, get an access to, get an account on. That wouldn't be allowed in JOSS, for example. So it has to be a place where everyone can easily access the platform. The software must have a research application, so it must be obviously research software as through our definition, and we explicitly do not want to publish results. We do not review the submissions that come to JOSS for the sort of merit of particular research results, so you can't publish novel results in JOSS, but you can publish novel software. We have guidelines around the contribution guidelines and the paper, so we typically expect submitters to be major, they must be major contributors to the software. That typically means as an author of code, but it doesn't have to mean that. And so authorship can obviously be, a contribution to a software project can be in many different forms. Because the review process runs on GitHub, you have to have a GitHub account as the submitting author to participate in the review. And the software has to be hosted in a Git repository. And that should include the paper, and any BibTeX files and any images should be in that repo too. They don't have to be in the default branch, or they don't ever have to make it into the source control history. You can have them in a branch that you don't merge at the end of the review, but they do have to be in the repository somewhere. And the software must be publicly accessible. So again, this is about that freely accessible, clonable, browsable, and a place where anyone can contribute. So today we're going to do an example with dfitspy, which is Romain's software. So do you want to talk us through this?
So it's basically a software that I published in just 5 years ago. Yes, 5 years ago. So it's a software about file handling in astronomy. So if you know a bit of astronomy, you know that it relies on FITS format. So it's basically files where you have data and metadata in the same file. And the metadata is basically a dictionary that can contain thousands of keywords, and it's very hard to actually find the right ones. So I created this dfitspy utilitary software that actually skims through all the file that you want and gives you a list of all the keywords. So you can see an example there. And so that's what we are going to resubmit today. So we will not go through the end of publication because there is no point to publish it twice, but we are just going to resubmit it directly to JOSS. All right, so now we are going to move to GitHub. So this is the repository. So you have the code, you have the documentation. Yeah, I think I will look there. So you have a full documentation there with the change logs, what is it, what it's not, acknowledgement and citation, how to install, how to use it as an executable, how to use the API functions, and actually the ancestors of this module that was made at the European Southern Observatory 30 years ago, and that actually not work anymore. So that's why actually I recreated this in Python. And as Arfon said, so you have to create the paper, and the paper is basically, it's very easy. It's basically just your README, and it's written in Markdown, so you have it there. So it's very short as well. So it's a statement of a summary, a statement of need, how to use it, how to acknowledge it, and then references. And that's basically the dfitspy paper. So some can be a bit longer, but in general they're quite short. There is no point to write pages and pages. You have documentation for that. And basically when you end up having a PDF for a paper, and basically it's in the GitHub Actions. And the action, actually, you can copy-paste it from the JOSS documentation. So so draft PDF. So here. And basically, I just copy-paste this from JOSS, and then it compiles the Markdown to a PDF. And that, in the end, looks like that. So that's what you have when you actually submit. So you have a draft, the authorship, you have the DOI that is not yet there because it will be assigned by the submission in the publication process. But you have access to the review, the repository, the archive, and that's your paper. So now we're going to submit it. So when you want to submit it, you basically go to Google, you type Journal of Open Source Software, and so maybe we can do that very quickly. So you will have to log in with an ORCID, yeah, and then push submit a paper to JOSS, and you will arrive to this page there. It's very easy. So you put the title of the paper, of your module, you give the Git repository, the branch. So in my case, the branch is in the paper is in the main branch, so there is nothing to put there. The software version, if it's a new submission, and then you have some keywords. So it's here general astronomy, and a small abstract that I didn't really write. It's just a small abstract. And then you say, okay, I certify that I'm submitting the software that I have authored. It compiles, there is a PDF of the paper, and then I read the code of conduct of JOSS, and I submit the paper. If it works. Does it work?
What happened? Did it go?
Nothing.
Let's have a look. Well, let's skip to, I think it went. Do you know, I just got an email from Heroku saying they were doing database maintenance just before this talk, which is exactly what you don't want. So let's see what happens. Has it actually submitted?
Oh, it doesn't go through.
If you were wondering if this is a live demo, now you know. Let's have a look. Okay, let's find out.
And so now it's in the hand of the editor-in-chief.
No, it did not go. Ah, come on. Why did it not go? I don't think so.
Well, actually, I wrote this is an abstract. This is, yeah. Maybe there is a character size. Just
no, I don't think so. Let's just fill in the form from scratch. How about that? Okay. Oh, there you go. For some reason, it bounced you out through Orchid. Sorry. There you go.
It's all right. Okay, so let's try again.
Hopefully, we get the demo gods on our side this time.
Okay.
Sorry, Romain, I'm going to make you.
It's all right. That's the Murphy's law. Okay. So. Good. Here, that's blank. 20.4.1. So here you can choose the keywords that it relates to, and this is a small abstract.
You've got to pick the submission type as well. So.
Yes, new submission. Okay,
hey. All right, submitted. There we go. Okay, so yeah, basically if you haven't realized, you're going to watch Romain and I use a web browser for the next 30 minutes, but we will leave some time for questions. So what we're going to do here, I'm just going to show you what's happened behind the scenes. This is the dashboard that all the editors have access to. So there's a submission here that's come into the site, and we want to move it to a state where it's picked up by one of the editors of JOSS. So this is just a small check that we do as an editorial team, but once we think something looks okay, we submit, we click this button, which creates, and we'll just go look at this now, what we call a pre-review issue. And this is really the kind of the meeting room for a submission to JOSS. So every paper that goes through JOSS has 2 issues on GitHub. We said that Edwin was going to be the reviewer. Of course, the fun thing is here that actually anyone in here could mess with us on this review if you are so motivated in the next few minutes, because this is a public repository. This is just an issue on GitHub, and you can see all of the submissions, about 300 submissions that are currently in some stage of review at JOSS. By the way, just a hat tip to the ROpenSci folks who are somewhere here, marked here somewhere. A lot of what the review process originally for JOSS was based on was actually the ROpenSci project. So if you're familiar with that, it's nice that we're both in the same session here today. So you can see this is the information that Romain submitted with his paper. So we know where the repository is, we know what version it is. At this point, we don't have a reviewer or an editor assigned, but we have this issue that's sort of in a waiting state. We have a robot called EditorialBot at JOSS, which is effectively, if any of you are familiar with the idea of sort of chat ops, sort of automating engineering work through a conversation with a bot. That's what EditorialBot does. So the first thing that happens when a review is opened is that EditorialBot introduces itself and says, you can talk to me and ask me to do things, including generating the paper. But it also does things that help us as an editorial team function. So there's a DOI in one of the references in the BibTeX, and that is verified as a real resolving DOI here by EditorialBot. We're also running a tool called Clock, which is counting the lines of code. It's looking at the structure of the repository and also trying to figure out who the authors are. So again, this just gives us a clue to what sort of software is this? We can see it's a mixture of JavaScript and Python, and then some markup languages. It also does things like checks the length of the paper. So as Romain was saying, we don't want very long papers at JOSS. In fact, our sort of soft limit is 1,000 words, so this one looks great. We also require the paper to have a section called Statement of Need, which this one does, which is great. So it checks things like that. Also checks the license. Oh, yes, and there you go. Thank you, Dan. Dan's trolling me from the audience. So no, this pre-review is public. So if you are interested, you could subscribe to this repo. I would not subscribe to this repo. There's 300 things under review, lots of people commenting all the time. But in theory, you could just watch this repository and look for reviews that you were interested in participating in. As we saw before, using the GitHub action, exactly the same code is running behind the scenes here. And so we also try and compile the paper. So this is just pandoc running behind the scenes. Amusingly to me, we have this tool that finds the 5 most historically similar papers. And amusingly to me, it doesn't find the paper that has actually been published in JOSS. So I obviously have some work to do on my own code here. But in theory, these are similar papers, and they kind of are. They are related to spectroscopic data reduction, something to do with astronomical surveys. So all of these papers are potential sources of reviewers for the editor who might pick up the paper. Because one of the biggest challenges, if you've ever done editorial work, is finding reviewers and editors to handle a paper. So I would, this list of names here is potentially interesting. So there we go. Oh, so that's cool. So I'm not sure what that is. That's probably some spam. I'm on my GitHub staff account here, by the way. So let's see. So the first thing to do is you need to assign an editor. So for this submission, I'm going to assign myself as editor. Typically, there would be a number of different editors that we might pick from in the pool. So just at the top here, we can see this is in the Astronomy, Astrophysics, and Space Sciences track. There are a number of people in that track. And so the first thing to do is find an editor. We're not going to bother trying to do that today. I'm going to act as the editor. And then the next thing we might do is try and find reviewers. So again, we have these suggestions from here. We also have a reviewers database where people who have volunteered to review would be able to help provide a review. But for the purposes of this submission, we're going to have Edwin help us out here. So now I have to try and remember your handle. So let's see. Edwin B. 12. There you go. Would you be willing to review this submission for JOSS? So typically, invites to review happen in a number of different ways. They might be through emails that you might send to people that you know, or like this, where we would tag somebody. Edwin would love to be a reviewer. What a delightful surprise. So we're going to add Edwin here. So the next thing we do is add Edwin B12 as a reviewer. All this does, by the way, is updates the, so we'll just wait for editorial bot to do this. So what this is doing is it's updating this information at the top of the review. So if you recall, these both said pending initially here. Now we have Edwin as a reviewer. JOSS submissions that actually go through a real review, because we're just going to sort of show the mechanics of it today, would have a minimum of 2 reviewers. But for today, we're just going to move forward with 1. So once we've got a editor assigned and we've got a number of reviewers identified, then we can start the review. And so as I mentioned before, every submission into JOSS has a pre-review issue, which is where we find the editor and the reviewers, and then it has the main review issue, which we will go look at now, which is where the actual review takes place. So a little bit more information about JOSS reviews. They are exclusively happen in and on GitHub. So there is a checklist-based review process that the reviewers are going through. Where does that checklist come from? Well, you actually ask EditorialBot to generate it. So much of the same things are happening here right now. We've got another issue here, which is now called the review issue, and we've got the same information here. But now EditorialBot is doing the same things. and we've got the same checks happening because things might change over time during the review process. But this is where the reviewer that would then be invited to open a checklist. So Edwin has hopefully done that, is going to do it. Should I refresh?
Oh, sorry.
Let's see what happens. Let's see one of these checklists. Okay, so there we go. So we're going to see Edwin do that. And then editorial bot has admin permissions on this repo, so it can just update the issue and add the checklist. So the review process at JOSS is based on this checklist. The actual things that are being checked are a mix of sort of what I would consider sort of review compliance. So are you going to adhere to the code of conduct? Do you state publicly that you are not conflicted and you can provide an impartial review here? But then there's some relatively straightforward review items to check. So is the source code available at this URL, for example? Well, yeah, we can see it. Is the license OSI approved? Well, actually, editorial bot is helping us with that. But then there's some things that might be more subtle. So, for example, contribution and authorship. It's possible that there are multiple authors on this paper and only one of them is in the Git history. Well, that might be a question that comes up from a reviewer, like, could you explain what's going on here? Maybe one of the authors wrote the funding grant or actually did a lot of the design of the software but didn't actually do the actual coding. There's a check for substantial scholarly effort. This is around, we don't allow very, very small submissions in JOSS. There's some things that are related to actually JOSS is being indexed by other venues. So I think it's PubMed that asked us to introduce, PubMed Central asked us to introduce this check, that if there are data that are being published, that they're accessible to the reviewers. And I think the reproducibility as well, and this human and animal research. These are all requirements for any PubMed index journal. And then for each of so there's functionality checks around installation, there's documentation checks. A lot of the software obviously should be already documented, so often in case the reviewers are really checking that what we would expect to exist does exist. And then there's some specific checks related to the paper as well. But for each of these checklist items, there's actually a reviewer guideline which can, and I'll just zoom this in a bit more. For each of the checklist items, there are guidelines for the reviewer. So, for example, for tests, and this is one that comes up quite a lot at JOSS, we do not require automated tests for software, but we do require there to be testing procedures. So we think it's sort of best in class is to have a full CI suite hooked up to some kind of automated tool. But it's also okay if you have documented testing steps that allow people to objectively check the expected functionality of the software. No testing procedures is not okay, and that would fail the review on that criterion. So, as I say, everything that's in the checklist is also in the everything that's in the checklist has guidelines on GitHub. I see people are trying to add themselves. Yes, there you go. Oh, I guess I can just point this out. So not anyone can add themselves a reviewer, even though we love it when people volunteer. You can't do that because you're not an editor. So whoever's doing that. So people work through the checklist, and typically this is not a kind of one and done process. So obviously this is an open review, and so the authors and the reviewers can talk to each other here. This is actually one of the best parts of the review experience, in my opinion, at JOSS, that everyone can have a conversation, can work together to improve the software. That could be a conversation that includes feedback from the editor, responses from the author, follow-up questions, clarifications from the reviewer. So here, Edwin's made a suggestion here that this is, well, firstly, looks like he likes the software. This is good news, but also has opened an issue to say, actually, you're kind of missing some key things here that I think would improve your software. the author might respond in a hostile way to that, but maybe not today. You're going to accommodate the reviewer feedback? Great. This is a good news story. So typically, what we'd like to see is issues get opened on the upstream repository and cross-linked. So it's not uncommon to see, a whole bunch of issues opened, and so you can see here they're green right now because they're open, and then get closed during the process. So, typically a reviewer will start their review and then they'll stop somewhere during this list. Maybe they get stuck on some kind of functionality bit, or they're stuck on some install procedure, and they'll ask a question, they'll open an issue, the author might respond, and then there'll maybe be a pull request that will resolve that issue with the installation instructions, and then they'll move on. So they'll move to the next phase of the review. So typically it's an iterative process. Our goal is for reviews to complete in sort of roughly 6 weeks. I think on average we're actually closer to about 3 or 4 months these days, on average across all the papers in JOSS. But looks like, there we go. Romain is going to make his change. So how's your change coming on there? It's coming in?
Yeah.
So typically there'd be many issues here that get opened and many updates. But once the authors have responded to all the reviewers, then typically the editor, so Dan's also suggested some changes, so that's good. But we're probably not going to deal with those today. So once the author has responded to all the reviewer feedback and the reviewers are happy, then that's where the editor would step in and proceed to take the submission through the final stage of the publishing process. So I don't know, Edwin. So the author here is saying, look, I've done the work. I fixed your open issue here, and hopefully Edwin is going to go close that. So let's see. Oh yes, Dan, thanks. I just realized you just cross-linked it. That was good. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. So we've got to the end of the review. All the checklist items are checked. Typically, I would ask the reviewer at this point if they haven't if we haven't explicitly had a recommendation from the reviewer, I would ask for explicit sort of approval. So we've got that. So at this point, this is where, thank you. This is where I would then tag the author again and ask them to do the last steps in their publishing, in the last checks that they need to do as an author before we can publish. So that would be making an archive of the software. So all of the software that we publish in JOSS, we require that the authors create an archive of it. So typically that's on Zenodo or Figshare or somewhere like that. So here we have an archive from Romain. So I'll just go have a look at that. So I check. Oh, look, I'm an author as well. Lucky me. Obviously, this would be a conflict. I think I made an edit to your README, which made me an author. There you go. But imagine that didn't happen, and I wasn't also somehow credited as an author of this submission. So now we'd assign, set the archive as the archive on the submission. So let's see, is that gone? Yep, so that updates this field here. And then we would be, great, let's do ready to accept and publish in JOSS. So this is where we're going to stop today because we actually don't want to publish this submission twice. But now this is running a whole bunch of checks behind the scenes. It's preparing the submission to be published. And actually, let me show you one earlier that I was just working on, which is actually in our OpenSci submission somewhere. Maybe it's already just been closed. Let me just, sorry, I had one earlier that was, that had just gone through the submission, so let's just have a look at this one. Oh yeah, here we go. So this is what the recommend accept output looks like. So this is actually a paper I was handling just earlier today. So what that does is it opens a pull request with all of the artifacts that are associated with submitting for a DOI with Crossref, the JATS output that goes to PubMed, also the final PDF that gets created. So here's the Crossref metadata for a submission. This is the JATS output, and then somewhere in here there's also a PDF lurking. And so yeah, so you can see the PDF here. And so the last step is to do actually, and is to do the accept, but we're not actually going to do that today. But although I could here, I guess. All right, I think we are done.
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah. So questions, comments, concerns, your thoughts? Happy to. We've got about 10 minutes, I think.
Yep, that was a surprise. I wasn't prepared yet. But we have a lot of questions. So
Okay,
it's good that
amazing.
we have a bit of time. Let's start with a higher rated one. How does JOSS handle software updates? For example, once I've published version 1.0 of a software in JOSS, would you accept a new submission for, can we actually get the questions up there from the volunteers?
Can we do that? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Should we just plug that? Yeah. Yes. So can you publish again? Yes, you can. And this has happened, I want to say, 3 or 4 times over the last 8 years. What we require is that it is a major release. So the question says version 1 to version 2. You know, providing the difference between those 2 versions was a substantial contribution in and of itself, then yes, you can. What we don't support is a sort of continual publishing model, so version 1 and 1.1 and 1.1.1. You know, that's something we don't support. And that's because one of the challenges of running JOSS is we're correlating a scholarly sort of output, a paper, with some software work. And so we have to pick some level of effort in the software that we think correlates to a software paper. And so we wrote a blog post about this called Substantial Scholarly Effort or something. I forget exactly what the title was, but it's on the JOSS blog. Have a read. That will give you the idea of what we're aiming for there.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, does JOSS plan to support further identifiers beyond DOI, such as the software hash identifier?
Yeah, I've talked to Software Heritage about, that's what this would be, right? Software hash edit, is that? Yeah. I've talked to the Software Heritage people. In theory, I think we could. I think honestly, I think it's partly where we choose to spend our effort, and DOIs were the easiest thing to support initially, and certainly when we set it up. But I mean, I've talked to the Software Heritage folks, so we're not against it. Dan, do you have thoughts?
You could just mention RAW as well.
Oh yeah, RAW. Yeah, we've actually just added, or in the process of adding support for RAWs, which stand for Research Organization Registry or something. RAW identifiers as well as ORCIDs are about to be supported in JOSS in the papers as well.
Thank you. What's the average submission time to JOSS? I noticed there are quite a few reviews open, so it might take a while to get through the stack.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, so there's actually a JOSS Analytics site that we calculate these statistics every week. So there's a GitHub Pages site that generates these. I mentioned it, it's about 3.5 months. We've got slower over time, sadly. That's just partly the volume of submissions we handle. But we do have a lot of editors. So we have about 85 editors for those 300 submissions. And of course, the editors aren't doing the reviews, it's the reviewers doing the reviews. So yeah, so it's about 3.5 months from submission to publish today.
Okay, thank you. More questions. Does JOSS publish standards in similar projects? For example, would the RO crates described in the lightning talks be suitable for JOSS?
No, I don't think it is. I don't know what an RO crate is, sorry. So, but Dan, do you want to answer? Yeah.
Sorry, so just really quickly, so JOSS just publishes software papers about
Right.
specific software, not about other objects, not about models, not
Right,
about
thank you.
theory.
Yeah, I
not
wasn't
about
sure what
anything
this
else.
one is. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
But if you wanted to start your own journal that could publish such artifacts, you could, because all of the software that runs JOSS is open source and available. And so there are clone journals. So the Journal of Open Source Education runs exactly the same software. The Julia conference proceedings also runs on exactly the same software. So if you wanted to publish these artifacts, you could, but just not in JOSS.
How does JOSS handle repository migrations, like transferring from a personal or organizational account or a migration outside GitHub? Can URLs be modified a posteriori, or should a new submission be done instead?
I definitely think we can do some support here. I mean, we do, if you rename something on GitHub, it would redirect anyway, so if you renamed your account. But if you move the software, I mean, I think within some time period, we would probably accommodate an update, but that's also kind of why we asked for there to be an archive of the software created, because our expectation is that the long-term sort of safe copy of the software is actually the archive that sits with Zenodo or Figshare or whoever.
Thank you. We have more questions coming in, so good job that you finished early. What is the usual time commitment you expect from a JOSS reviewer?
I mean, you can spend as much time reviewing as you want, but I would say typically for a fairly modest size package where it's in reasonable shape, it's a small number of hours to review a submission. You know, and everyone, you know, if you get invited to review, you don't have to accept, of course. And so if you have a very difficult submission, it's very large, or there's lots of problems with it, then it could be quite a long engagement. So, you know, I think it can be hours to months, depending on the submission. So we often, for very difficult submissions, we will often pause them and send it back to the author and say, look, there's so much feedback here that you need to accommodate that we're not going to move the review forwards, and we sort of let the reviewers take a break at that point. And sometimes the reviewers would even swap out if they feel like they've maxed out the commitment they can make.
Thank you. You can't publish all open source software, so what sort of things does JOSS want to publish in future?
I think I covered that in the research software scope at the start. So, I mean, we want to publish research software, so open source research software.
Don't know whether
Don't know if there's
Laura
any
wanted
clarification.
I'm trying to find her. Over there.
It has actually been answered by the question on objects and things like that.
Okay.
So, yes, I published it too late, so it has been answered.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Then, are there any plans for JOSS to publish papers in HTML for improved accessibility?
Yes. Who asked me that? We're working on it right now. Yeah, yeah, we are actually. So one quick thought: there are viewers for JATS files, like eLife I don't know if that's supported anymore. So you can load the JATS into an accessible viewer, I think, but I understand PDFs aren't brilliant for that. So yeah, we, you know, honestly, one of the challenges there is maintaining every output format that you maintain is a development overhead and a maintenance cost, and so we've been very cautious about that. But yeah, we do get that feedback, so it's definitely something we're considering.
Great. Is the software heritage archive accepted by JOSS reviewers as alternative to Zenodo? Almost every public repository on GitHub is already archived in SWH nowadays.
Yeah, well, we basically just covered that in the previous question. Not currently, but in theory it could be. Yep.
Okay, and the last one I've got on here currently is how do you register to be a reviewer?
Delighted you asked. If you go to the JOSS website, there's a button that says volunteer to be a reviewer, and there's a dedicated site that you can go to and fill in your details.
Okay, thank you. So I do not see any more questions for the time being. So let's thank our speakers again then.